أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم. والذي بعث في الأمين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا في ضلال مبين. والذي بعث في الأمين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين. وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم. ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء الله ذو الفضل العظيم. مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا بئس مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآيات الله والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. قل يا أيها الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين. ولا يتمنونه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين. قل إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم قل إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة يا أيها الذين آمنوا الصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا فابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين. صدق الله العظيم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه، ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدًا عبده ورسوله ونبيه وصفيه وحبيبه. بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح للأمة، وجاهد في سبيل الله حتى أتاه اليقين، وتركنا على المحجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك. فاللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين، وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين، وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين، وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في كل وقت وحين، وعلى آله الأطهار، وعلى أصحابه الأخيار، وعلى أتباعه الأبرار إلى يوم الدين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما وبعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وإن خير الهدي هدي سيدنا ومولانا رسول الله وإن شر الأمور لمحدثاتها فكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. When Abdul Qadir al-Jilani radiallahu anhu was a young boy, his mother set him off on a journey to leave his hometown to go to a neighboring town to study with the scholars and to begin his journey of learning. Now, before he left, his mother told him, I want you to make me a promise in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you will never lie and that you will always speak the truth. So he said, okay, I make this promise to you. And then she took his jubbah and then she opened up the seam on the coat and she put in it some money for him and then sewed it up so he wouldn't lose it. So he set off with the caravan, and in the middle of the journey, they were set upon by highway robbers. So these people came and they robbed the caravan, and they were shaking everything and looking for money and looking for valuables. And then one of the kind of the chief of this group, they came to Abdul Qadir, this young boy, and he said, "Do you have anything?" He said, "Why, yes, I have these dinars that my mother sewed inside my coat for me." So, he thought that this is very foolish. He said, young man, you could have lied about this. I would have never have discovered that. Why would you be so forthright? And he said, well, before I left, my mom made me promise in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I always speak the truth. I will never lie. So this man, as the story goes, this man was so overcome by this response that he turned to the heavens and he said, how is it that this young boy is not scared of a thief, not scared of losing his money, in order not to violate this oath that he's taken? And here I am, I have lived my life in the haram. And he made his tawbah, and this is how this man came back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the many, many, many stories we have of Sidi Abdul Qadir al-Jilani radiallahu anhu is, min kibar al-awliya. He is from the greatest of the saints of this ummah radiallahu anhu. I begin with this story because I wanted to address this idea of self-confidence and validation today. Abdul Qadir radiallahu anhu, this luminary figure, but this is a story that happens when he was young, not after he was endowed with all of this knowledge and all of these students. He was just a young boy starting off his journey in this, pure young state. But he was so attached to that oath. He was so attached to what his mother promised him. He was so confident that that was important that he stood for that, and he could have easily lied. He could have easily found some kind of loophole, ethical loophole. I have to protect my wealth and now I'm all by myself. He could have come up with 1,000,001 excuses. But he didn't, not because he was naive. He didn't, not because he was inexperienced. He was honest because he was confident in his value system. That value of being honest was more important than the consequence of losing this money. That at that moment, that value of honesty, transparency, not to lie, was who he was. It was his identity. His existence was based on that value. And because it was a pure value, and because he was honest with it, that honesty shone, reflected out, and caused that man to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a very important hadith, we all know it. Abu Hurairah narrates that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Al-mu'minu al-qawi خير وأحب إلى الله من المؤمن الضعيف وفي كل خير. That the Prophet ﷺ said, as is narrated in the hadith that's in Muslim, the strong believer is better and more beloved to Allah Ta'ala than the weak believer, even though in both of them there is good. Because both of them have belief. Now, usually when we hear this hadith, we hear this hadith in the context of worldly possessions. Whoever, maybe it's a parent or a teacher, somebody's telling us this to tell us we have to focus on our studies, we have to do well, we have to earn well, because the believer that's stronger is better than the weaker believer because they can help their brother. The idea is, why is the stronger believer more beloved? Because he's more useful, because he can help the community, he can help the person that's weak. The person that's weak needs assistance. They have their belief. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, "Fi kullin khayrin," both of them is good. But the stronger believer, whether they're physically stronger, whether they're financially stronger, whether they're intellectually stronger, is going to be of more use because they can help those that are less fortunate. That's true. That's, I'm not going to say that's not true. That's what the hadith means. But there's also a deeper meaning to the hadith. What makes a person a strong believer is that when they are strongly attached to those values, like Abdul Qadir was in this story, radiallahu anhu. It's the values that the principles that we live our life with, that we hold dearly, that when we hold them strongly, will be of more use to other people. Because like Abdul Qadir, it will shine out, those principles will come out in your conduct. As we have seen, since the beginning of this conflict, we have stopped listening to what people are saying, and we are looking at what people are doing, because people's actions are oftentimes a better translator of what they believe than what they say, because people lie, they're duplicitous, they're deep fakes, all this kind of stuff, all this nonsense. But when you see innocent people being slaughtered, day in and day out, you can't deny that unless you have a sickness. إِنَّمَا تَنْكَرُ الْعَيْنُ الضَّوْءِ مِنْ رَمَدِي. The poet says that the sick eye will deny the light of day because the eye is sick. But alhamdulillah, our eyes are not sick, we can see it. So when you are firm with your values, when we are firm with our principles, that is how we begin this idea of being a strong believer. Because we will be able to help the people around us, whether they be our co-religionists, or whether they be our neighbors, or whether they be people in the larger community, wherever they may be, they will benefit from that strength. I was thinking a lot about this the last couple of weeks, about the importance of us having confidence in our principles. There's a verse in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَن تَرْضَ عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَالنَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعُوا دِينَهُمْ. No, millatahum. This is an interesting verse. The Jews and the Christians, the verse says, will not be pleased with you until you follow their millah. What's the difference between the millah and the deen? Because elsewhere Allah Ta'ala says, Inna deen and Allah al-Islam. It doesn't say Inna al-millata and Allah al-Islam. No, the deen with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Islam. In English, we refer to it as Islam with a capital I. But in this verse, Allah Ta'ala is warning us that people will not be pleased with you. They will not validate you unless and until you follow their millah. So what is the difference between the millah and the deen? Some of the lexicographers and ulama will say they're interchangeable, obviously, but nothing in the Quran is a mistake. There's a reason why we have these two words. The millah is a manifestation of religion. So we are the millah of Islam. And Bani Israel is the millah of Bani Israel. They are the Jewish millah. And then the Christians are the millah of Christ alayhi salam. It is the operational manifestation of those principles. What we say in the language of Islam, we call it a sharia. So this is the sharia of Moses. We follow the sharia of Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salatu salam. The Christians follow the sharia of Christ, so on and so forth. We refer to ourselves as the millah of Ibrahim alayhi salam Because we are following the Sharia derivatives that come from the descendants of Ibrahim, because the Prophet ﷺ is a descendant of Ismail alayhi salam, and then all of the Hebrew prophets, with very few exceptions, are descendants of Isaac alayhi salam. And then there are other millahs, but there are other non-Abrahamic faiths. There are the Dharmic faiths, there are the Far Eastern faiths, the faiths of the ancient world that are no longer with us, like the ancient Egyptians and maybe the Native Americans, so on and so forth. All of those are manifestations of the deen. So in our understanding, Allah Ta'ala is saying there's only one deen. There's only one set of absolute metaphysical principles. That God is one and we are to obey Him. That's basically it. When inna deen indallahi al-Islam, that's what it means in its most basic manifestation. We are one attempt to understand that ideal. And remember, of course, we believe that our deen is intact and correct and we follow it. I'm not saying other than that. But I want you to understand that there is really a distinction between the two that we don't really think about. And to prove my point, remember the immense amount of plurality we have within Islam itself. One of the things that they taught us when you think of a legal issue and you issue a fatwa, how does every fatwa end? It ends with the statement, Wallahu a'lam, and Allah knows best. Why? Because you do not know if you're correct. I think I'm correct. I'm pretty sure I'm correct. I hope I'm correct. I will defend my position because I'm pretty sure I'm right and the other mujtahid is wrong. But Wallahu a'lam, I don't know. So, and this is, I know, technical, but go with it for a moment. So when we talk about the Sharia ruling, al-hukm al-shar'i, what is the ruling of such and such issue, which is what our legal system is, we don't say that this is Allah's ruling in this issue. We don't say this is the hukm of Allah, because I don't know with absolute certainty what the hukm of Allah is. But I say, kashifun an hukmillah. This opinion and this ijtihad, hopefully, insha'Allah, elucidates and highlights what Allah's ruling is in this issue. Wallahu a'lam. And only Allah Ta'ala knows best. In our eschatological belief, when Christ comes back, there will be no more madhahib inside Islam. We believe that He will be the absolute mujtahid, and mujtahid al-mutlaq, and whatever He says, we will follow. There will be no opportunity to follow other positions because He is receiving this from revelation. So even within our Islam with a lowercase I, our La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah Islam alayhi salatu wasalam, we have the plurality, which shows that this is a millah, attempting to follow the deen of our Creator. Coming back to the verse, not to get too off on the reservation with you guys, but to come back to the verse, لَن تَرْضَ عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَالنَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعُوا مِلَّتَهُم. Of course, the verse indicates, prima facie the Jews and the Christians, but this is, any other group. They are not going to validate your beliefs. They are not going to validate your actions unless and until you follow what they want you to follow. And this is where this issue of self-confidence becomes very important. We have to be very self-confident in what we believe in. We have to be absolutely crystal clear with what our principles are. We've been talking this last 5-6 weeks about the sanctity of human life. This is an absolute principle. I don't care who it is. Anybody that argues other than that is not following our principles. Human life is sacred. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. I don't care if it's a Jewish life, I don't care if it's a Christian life, I don't care if it's a Zionist, I don't care if it's a Buddhist. Life is life. The Prophet ﷺ himself stood for the funeral of a Jewish man. And the Sahaba said, this is a Jewish man, Ya Rasulullah. Maybe, he made a mistake, or why are you standing? He said, أَوَلَيْسَتْ نَفْسَ, but is it not a soul? And he stood to honor the sanctity of the human soul. When Imam Ali alayhi salam wrote his letter to Malik al-Ashtar, who was going to be his governor in Egypt, unfortunately, he was, if I remember correctly, he was assassinated on the way. He didn't make it to Egypt. But in the letter that he wrote to him, one of the things that he said is a very famous text. He said, you're going to find two people in Egypt. Either you'll find a co-religionist, another Muslim, which is a small minority at that time, or you'll find a co-human being. You'll find a brother or sister in humanity. Right? These are our teachings. Innocent life is innocent life. It's like the compass. Anywhere that you spin, it's always going to point north. That's one of our principles. Unfortunately, that's a principle that people now are calling into question. They say different things. They use different terminology. They use, third grade level logic. But what they are essentially saying is that not all life is equal. And that's where a lot of the tension comes from between our narrative and other people's narratives, is it comes back to these principles. Now, for us to maintain our sanity, for us to maintain our intellectual and spiritual strength and integrity, we must double down on these values. And we must understand that these values are unchanging. They do not change with people, place, time, and circumstance. The Sharia changes with people, time, and circumstance. You're traveling, you combine and shorten your prayers. You're sick, you make tayammum. You overslept the prayer, you wake up and you pray it when you remember. You have a cast, you wipe over the cast, you don't remove the cast and wash it. The Sharia changes. But these values do not change. That's why they're values. The deen does not change. The values upon which this deen is established do not change. They are valid for every time, for every place, for every people, for every circumstance. And that's the confidence that we need to have, like the story of Abdul Qadir al-Jilani radiallahu anhu. Because when we are confident with those values, in holding those values, in believing those values, it will express itself out in our actions. That's why we openly call people to peace, humanity. We are an integral part of the interfaith community in our area, and this is something that's very important. From the first year of the establishment of this masjid, of this, ICCP has an older history, but of this masjid, this current location, we've always been involved with the interfaith community because those are our values. We will not change those values no matter what happens in the world, no matter who does what. We will say the same things publicly that we say privately. When we have the opportunity to inject these values in a conversation, we will do so. And when it is not appropriate, we will, maintain our internal conversation with the community. But that's the type of strength that we need to have. A lot of times all of us, myself included, we really are seeking validation from somebody else. And let me tell you, that validation is never going to come. I don't need somebody to validate my beliefs. I don't need somebody to tell me, oh, that's a very interesting observation when I'm, mentioning like a hadith or a verse in the Quran. Because that same person that I seek their validation, at some point when I come to say something else, they're going to attack what we're saying. Oh, this is barbaric, or this doesn't make any sense. And the most extreme of this is people that say hideous things about Islam, like our friend Stuart in New York. I'll continue to mention his name until the day I die. Really, I will. Because he's an ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the wrong direction, but he's an ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the most grotesque manifestation of thing. Why would I seek someone like his validation? What can he possibly validate? But rather, we need to teach these people. It's okay to coexist with people that don't believe in what you believe in. Do you know that the Prophet ﷺ, this is a fact that really blows my mind every time I think about it. Up until the 9th year of the Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ prayed towards Mecca. Because when in the beginning of the revelation, the Qibla was Jerusalem. And we believe that Jerusalem is the Qibla of all of the Anbiya. And because Mecca is south of Medina and south of Jerusalem, the Prophet ﷺ could face the Kaaba by facing Jerusalem. But when he went to Medina, ﷺ, he could no longer do that. So he had to give his back to Mecca and give his back to Mecca and face Jerusalem. And this upset the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. You know the series of ayat in Surah Al-Tawbah, in Surah Al-Baqarah, قَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا, etc. Allah Ta'ala, through revelation, changed the Qibla from Jerusalem to Mecca. But at that point, inside the Kaaba and outside the Kaaba, there were over 360 idols. Up until the 9th year of the Hijrah, the end of the Prophet's life, ﷺ, all of the Muslims were facing the Kaaba, and inside the Kaaba were idols. Now, has anyone accused the Prophet ﷺ of worshipping idols? I mean, no. I mean, even non-Muslims say, I mean, this is the man that came with monotheism. No one would ever say that about the Prophet ﷺ. So if you think about it, he coexisted with that situation, which is for us the most antithetical thing to Islam. Our deen is based on this very pure, we are emphatically monotheistic. We are very much against any anthropomorphic ideas of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the most basic teaching of Islam. Anybody knows that. Sunni, Shia, Salafi, everyone knows that. So there can be nothing more antithetical to Islam than having false idols inside the Kaaba and outside the Kaaba. But yet, because of the circumstance, because of the geopolitical circumstance at the time, the Prophet ﷺ coexisted with that. And when the time came, and he entered Mecca victoriously, إِنَّ فَتَحْنَا لَكَ فَتْحًا مُبِينًا, without shedding any blood. Even the hadith say that the Prophet ﷺ, all he did is he took his stick and he pointed to the idol and he said, جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. And it split. جَاءَ الْحَقُّ. There wasn't even no violence involved in that transaction. So if the Prophet ﷺ, who's our example, can coexist with that, then we certainly can coexist with people that hate us, that say rude things to us, that say harmful things to us, and we can maintain our values, and we can maintain our principles. We can be true to them, and we will emerge, inshallah, as the strong believers, as the Prophet ﷺ indicated in the hadith. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Last time I spoke with you, I spoke a little bit about the interfaith element in our area and what's happening and whatnot. And I also wanted to follow that up very briefly and share something with you that, alhamdulillah, a lot of our partners are listening to what we're saying and are cooperating with us. This last week on Tuesday, Imam Rafai was part of an interfaith delegation who went to visit Jamie Raskin, who is one of our representatives. And yesterday I accompanied also an interfaith delegation, and I had a meeting with Senator Chris Van Hollen in his office. It's a start, but we were able to share our concerns about what's happening in Gaza. We were able to share our concern for the rhetoric that's coming from the White House. I spoke a lot about the tone deafness of the president, specifically the president's message. He actually shared, even more upset than I was at the president's statements and leadership on this topic as it reflects to Muslim and Arab Americans. We also talked about the voting for a ceasefire in the UN and so on. So they were very receptive. Imam Rafai spoke with him last night. He said that Jamie was very receptive. Senator Van Hollen was also very receptive. And when the opportunity presents itself, alhamdulillah, we try to go and we try to represent. I'm not making any promises. No promises were made, but they were very receptive to the message. And there are other elected leaders who I will not mention their names who don't even want to meet with us. So at least not only did they meet with us, but they spent time with us. I think with Jamie Raskin, you guys took a picture. We didn't get that far. We got the staffer, and then she said, okay, you guys are okay. So then the senator came in. They got an hour with Jamie. I think we got about half an hour with the senator. But they were very receptive, while other people don't even want to meet with us. So alhamdulillah, I just wanted to tell you that people are listening to us, and we are trying to do what we can when we can. Alhamdulillah. Tonight we have class 7:30, and then Sunday morning Imam Rafai's halaqah. Specifically, we want to remember a 19-year-old Yusuf, who's the son of Sister Yazgul, who's suffering from the brain tumor, has now been moved to hospice care. So we're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for relief for the family and shifa, inshallah. We're also making dua for Sister Zinat Ahmed, the mother of Brother Saif Ahmed, recovering from surgery. Also, we do not want to forget the thousands, the tens of thousands of martyrs in Gaza who have died for nothing in this ongoing genocide. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept them as shuhada in His infinite mercy. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give relief to our brothers and sisters in Gaza. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to food them, to clothe them, to give them drink, to give them medical attention. We ask Allah ta'ala in His infinite power a cessation of all violence, inshallah. May they rebuild their homes and their lives. May they emerge stronger than they were before. We know that Allah Ta'ala is able over all things. فَاللَّهُمَّ اهْدِنَا فِي مَنْ هَدَيْتَ وَعَافِنَا فِي مَنْ عَافَيْتَ وَتَوَلَّنَا فِي مَنْ تَوَلَّيْتَ وَبَارِكْ لَنَا فِي مَا أَعْطَيْتَ وَقِنَا وَاصْرِفْ عَنَّا شَرَّ مَا قَضَيْتَ اللهم تب علينا توبة نصوحة تطهرنا بها جسما وقلبا وروحا اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين وانقلنا من دائرة سخطك إلى دائرة رضاك وافتح علينا فتوح العارفين بك واحشرنا تحت لواء نبيك صلى الله عليه وسلم يوم القيامة اللهم اسقنا من يده الشريفة شربة ماء لا نظمأ بعدها أبدا ثم أدخلنا الجنة بغير حساب ولا سابقة عقاب ولا عتاب ومتعنا بالنظر إلى وجهك الكريم في جنات الخلد يا رحيم فاللهم ارحم حينا وميتنا وحاضرنا وغائبنا وارفع أيدي الأمم عنا وأقمنا بالحق وأقم الحق بنا آمين 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 والحمد لله رب العالمين وصل اللهم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وأقم الصلاة إن الصلاة كانت على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
لا إله إلا الله سيدنا محمد رسول الله أقامه الله ما دامت السماوات والأرض. We have a full house today, so if everyone, the brothers, make your way all the way back to the left if possible. There's also, I think, space downstairs, the kitchen, so on and so forth. Istaqimu yarhamukumullah. Straighten your lines, pray as if this is your last prayer. Sallu salatan muwadda. Allahu Akbar. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم نشرح لك صدرك ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي أنقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك فإن مع العسر يسرا إن مع العسر يسرا فإذا فرغت فانصب وإلى ربك فارغب. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم. سمع الله لمن حمده. الحمد والشكر حمدا كثيرا طيبا. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى. الله أكبر. اغفر لي وارحمني واهدني واجبرني. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد، الله الصمد، لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم. سمع الله لمن حمده. لك الحمد والشكر حمدا كثيرا طيبا. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى. الله أكبر. اللهم اغفر لي وارحمني واهدني الله. سبحان ربي الأعلى. الله أكبر. وتحيات لله والصلوات والطيبات والسلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. والسلام عليك. كما صليت على سيدنا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. استغفر الله العظيم الذي لا إله